Hello， 大家好，欢迎回到外媒看中国，我是安博然。US President Donald Trump is at it again, running his mouth at a White House press conference where he ramped up the rhetoric by threatening another 200% tariff on China. His spiel centered around China's decision to limit the export of rare earth magnets, following the launch of Trump's ill-advised trade tariff tantrum way back in April. In usual Trump fashion, his claims featured lies, inaccuracies, and pumped-up pro-America rhetoric that many ordinary Americans may believe, but which are not fooling anyone else, least of all the Chinese government, who have largely decided to ignore the vocal spasms of the struggling president of a falling empire. Today, I'll break it down as we go beyond the propaganda. This is Reports on China. I'm Andy Boreham here in Shanghai. Let's get reporting. On August 25, US President Donald Trump answered media questions inside the Oval Office. Eventually, as is usually the case with a president who just loves the limelight and, in stark contrast with the president of China, for example, often veers off into misinformation, political rhetoric, and downright lies. Today, I'll break it all down for you guys. Now, the spiel in question centers around China's dominance of the world's rare earth magnet production. So first up, I'll provide a brief summary of the situation. Beginning in the late 1980s, China invested heavily in its rare earth industry. And by around the early 2000s, China was dominating the world supply. Rare earth magnets, which are essential in the production of many electronics, especially those critical to defense, aerospace, and medical industries, became a major part of China's rare earth industry. Today, most estimates suggest China supplies up to 90% of the world's magnets, with Japan producing around 5 to 10%, Europe 3%, and the United States less than 1%. Just 2 days after Donald Trump announced his ill-advised tariff scam on April 2, China restricted export of important rare earth magnets, hitting many key industries in the United States. As we all know, China pushed back hard, showing the United States that not only does it have all the cards, it produces the cards. This forced Trump into an uneasy truce of sorts, giving 90-day tariff pause after 90-day tariff pause. Despite that, China has not relented on its rare earth restrictions, determined to play the long game and hit Trump right where it hurts. Fast forward to this Monday, and Trump, always the sucker for media attention, started running his mouth again at the White House. Let's watch that clip first, and then I'll come back and debunk the main points.
But we have a very strong relationship, Howard, I would say, economically with China now, getting much better. They have to give us magnets. If they don't give us magnets, then we have to charge them 200% tariff or something, you know. But we're not going to have a problem, I don't think, with that. I think that's perhaps behind us. You know, China intelligently went and they sort of took a monopoly of the world's magnets. And nobody needed magnets until they convinced everybody 20 years ago, let's all do magnets. There were many other ways that the world could have gone. But so it'll take us probably a year to have them. We're heavy into the world of magnets now, only from a national security standpoint. But we have a powerful thing. It's airplane parts. They have many Boeing jets. You know, they had 200 jets that didn't fly. And I've sent them all, based on his word, I sent them all of the parts so their planes can fly. I could have held them back. I didn't do that because of the relationship I have. And their planes are now flying. You know, we had 200 of their planes were unable to fly because we were not giving them Boeing parts purposely, because they weren't giving us magnets. Therefore, we weren't giving them. But we have a much more powerful thing that's tariffs. If we wanted to put 100%, 200% tariffs on, we wouldn't do any business with China. And, you know, it would be okay, too, if we had to. But the magnet situation, we have tremendous power over them, and they have some power over us with magnets. We're going to have a lot of magnets in a pretty short period of time. In fact, we'll have so many we won't know what to do with them. But you know the story. It's a very interesting history with magnets. And it really is because presidents, not being business people, they allowed that to happen, and they shouldn't have.
Okay, where to begin? Well, there are three main points that I'll briefly discuss. Firstly, the claim that China somehow convinced everyone they needed to use magnets 20 years ago. Secondly, that the US will be able to produce its own supply of magnets within a year, so much that they won't know what to do with them all. And lastly, the claim that the US was withholding Boeing parts from China. Okay, so number one, to put it bluntly, China never needed to convince anyone to use magnets 20 years ago. What Trump is most likely talking about is the fact that by the early 2000s, China had become the world's top producer and supplier of rare earth magnets. But their popularity was not because China convinced the world they needed them, obviously. Magnets have been an important component in electronics since at least the 1990s, as computers became more and more popular. As the electronic industry has continued to develop, so too has the need for those magnets. It just so happens that China was clever enough to see that need to literally dig itself into the market. As just one example, the rise of electronic vehicles is massively pushing the magnet industry, with every EV needing up to 2 kilograms of high-performance magnets. Trump's second claim that the US will be producing a sufficient amount of magnets within a year is, you guessed it, just a case of political bluster and domestic propaganda. It's almost impossible that the US will ever match China's output, least of all in a year. Now, in July of this year, the US government invested $400 million into one of their biggest hopes for domestic production, a company called MP Materials in Fort Worth, Texas, after they showed promise by starting magnet production in January of this year. But get this, its own dream estimate for magnet production by the end of this year is just 1,000 metric tons, which represents a measly 0.5% of global production. And that's if everything goes exceedingly well. On top of that, the US and the West in general simply just cannot compete in a cost-effective manner with China's magnet production quality and low cost, which is why China has reached 90% of global supply to begin with. And get this, the US consumes an estimated 50 to 20% of the world's magnet supply. So will the US be independently producing its own magnets within a year, as per Trump's claim? No way. And lastly, Trump's claim that he graciously allowed Boeing to send plane parts to China in order to stop 200 planes being grounded. Well, that one is a blatant lie. In his Oval Office rant, Trump claimed he was holding Boeing parts back from export to China, but allowed them to be sent on word that China would continue sending rare earth magnets. His kind gesture, he reckoned, allowed 200 grounded planes to fly again. Not true. In actual fact, the reality is quite the opposite. China led the charge in grounding the Boeing 737 MAX in 2019 following 2 crashes with that plane, one in Indonesia and one in Ethiopia, killing a total of 346 people. Now, China was the first regulator in the world to entirely ground the 737 MAX, which it did the day after the Ethiopian Airlines incident. Many Chinese already worry about flying Boeing aircraft, and China is not afraid to ground entire fleets to protect its citizens, even when other governments are slow to do so. They were not being withheld by the US in any way, shape, or form, completely contrary to Trump's claims on Monday. Now, like the Chinese government, you have probably also stopped taking note of anything Trump says, especially when it pertains to China. But the scary fact remains that probably half of the United States still believe what he says, especially with the help of a complicit media who are willing to throw away usual journalistic ethics and repeat his lies verbatim. We certainly live in an interesting world. And on that note, that will be it for today, you guys. But as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think the US can catch up with magnet production and become independent? And how dangerous are Trump's blatant lies? Do let me know down below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help the channel. I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.